The moment my sister's car disappeared around the curve, I realized she wasn't coming back. Not in 5 minutes, not after the joke landed, not ever, at least not for me. I was standing outside a Greyhound station in Knoxville, Tennessee, on a Tuesday night in November. My backpack was at my feet, my phone was dead. My wallet had $11 and some change in it, and the temperature was dropping fast enough that I could see my own breath. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see people sitting in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights, waiting for buses that probably weren't coming for hours. In front of me, there was a parking lot, a row of streetlights, and nothing else. My sister and her husband had been gone maybe 45 seconds. I kept waiting for the headlights to come back around. I kept telling myself she was just circling the block, that this was the kind of thing she did, pushed it right to the edge, let it sit there for a second, and then laughed and said, okay, get in, I'm kidding. That was her whole personality, always had been. Even when we were kids, she'd hold the punchline just a little longer than she needed to, just to watch your face. But the parking lot stayed empty, and the cold kept coming. My name is Tessa. I'm 31 years old, and until that night in Knoxville, I genuinely believed my family had my back. Not in some naive Disney movie kind of way. I knew we had our problems. I knew my sister could be cruel in the way that only someone who grew up with you can be. The specific, targeted kind of cruel that uses your exact insecurities against you. But I thought, underneath all of that, there was something solid, something real. Some floor you'd eventually hit before it got too bad. That Tuesday night, I found out there wasn't. I should explain how we ended up in Knoxville in the first place. My mother lives in Memphis. She's been there my whole life, and every Thanksgiving, no matter what else is going on, we make the trip. I live in Columbus, Ohio. My sister Paige lives in Nashville with her husband Cody. The plan that year was for Paige and Cody to drive up to Columbus, pick me up, and the three of us would drive down to Memphis together. Road trip, family time, 8 hours in a car, split into manageable pieces. I should have driven myself. I've told myself this 100 times since. But Paige had asked me not to, because she wanted the company on the long stretch through Kentucky. And I said yes because that's what I always did with Paige. I said yes. The drive down started fine. We left Columbus around 9 in the morning, stopped for gas outside Louisville, got coffee, and drove through the hills with the radio on. Paige was in a good mood, which meant Cody was in a good mood, which meant things felt almost normal. We talked about our mom's cooking. We talked about Cody's job. I told them about a problem at work that had been stressing me out, and Paige gave me actual advice for once. The good kind. The kind that made me think maybe this trip was going to be different. We stopped for lunch in Nashville because that's where Paige and Cody live, and Paige wanted to pick up a dish she'd made the day before that was in their fridge. I waited in the car. That should have been a sign. I waited in the car for 40 minutes while they went inside, and when they came back out, Paige was on her phone, and Cody had a look on his face that I'd learned to read over the years. A flat, suppressed look. Like he knew something was coming and he'd already decided not to be involved. We got back on the road. 2 hours later, Paige pulled into the Greyhound station in Knoxville and said she needed to use the restroom. She asked me to grab her jacket out of the trunk. I got out, went around to the back of the car, and by the time I'd unzipped the bag to find her jacket, I heard the trunk close above me. I thought she'd hit the button by accident. Then I heard the car start. I came around the side fast, waving, and Paige was in the driver's seat laughing. Not a little. Not like she'd made a mistake and caught herself. She was full-on laughing, the kind that shakes your shoulders. Cody was in the passenger seat looking out the window. Not at me, away from me. And Paige rolled down the window and said, "You'll be fine. It's only 4 more hours. You're so capable, right? You can handle anything." And then she rolled the window back up. She drove away. There's a specific kind of shock that doesn't feel like shock. It doesn't feel like anything at first. Your brain just sort of decouples from the situation. I stood in that parking lot and watched her taillights disappear, and I remember thinking, in this very calm, detached way, she's actually gone. Those are actually her taillights. That is actually happening. Then my knees got a little weak and I sat down on my backpack because it was the only thing on the ground that wasn't wet. I had $11, a dead phone, my laptop in my bag, useless without power, and I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, which I had been through exactly twice in my life and knew nothing about. I sat there for probably 3 minutes, and then I made myself stand up, because sitting on a bag in a parking lot in the dark was not going to help anything. I went inside the Greyhound station. The woman at the counter had silver earrings and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she was doing something on her computer that she clearly didn't want to stop doing. I asked her what the next bus to Memphis was. She looked at me over the top of her glasses, looked back at the screen, and said the next bus to Memphis was at 6:15 in the morning. It was currently 8:47 at night. I asked how much a ticket cost. She told me. I had $11. She looked at me again. This time she didn't look back at the screen. You okay, honey? I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine, but I didn't know what else to say. I went and sat in one of the plastic chairs near the windows where I could watch the parking lot. Not because I thought Paige was coming back, but because I didn't know where else to look. The station smelled like old coffee and cleaning fluid. A man across the row from me was asleep with his coat over his face. A teenage kid near the vending machine was watching something on his phone with the volume low. Two older women were talking in the corner, not about anything in particular, the comfortable kind of talking that people do when they've been traveling a long time and just need to hear another voice. I tried to figure out my options. $11 would not buy a bus ticket. It would buy food, maybe. There was a vending machine, and I could see a diner across the street through the window, the kind with a lit sign and a parking lot with a few trucks in it. My phone was dead, which meant no Uber, no calling anyone, no Venmo or Zelle to receive money even if I could reach someone. My laptop was in my bag, but the charger was in Paige's car, which was now 4 hours south of here. I thought about my mom. She was expecting all three of us for dinner tomorrow. She didn't know any of this had happened. She was probably right now putting things in the fridge, reorganizing the spare room, doing the small preparatory rituals she always did before we came home. I thought about calling her from the station phone, if they had one, if I could figure out her number, which I realized I didn't actually have memorized, because nobody memorizes phone numbers anymore. I thought about Paige and what she'd said before she drove away. You're so capable, right? You can handle anything. The exact phrasing of it. The way she'd said it like it was a compliment but made it sound like an indictment. Like being capable was the reason this was okay to do to me. That was the moment I started getting angry. Not panicked. Angry, and the anger was useful. I stood up and walked over to the woman at the counter. I told her my sister had left me here. I told her I had $11 and a dead phone, and I needed to figure out how to get to Memphis. I told her I wasn't asking her to fix it, I just needed to think out loud with someone. She took her reading glasses off her head and set them on the counter. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a phone charger, one of those universal ones, the kind with 4 different tips, and plugged it into a power strip behind the desk without saying a word. What kind of phone? She said. I told her. She handed me the right adapter. While my phone was charging, she told me a few things. There was a shelter 4 blocks away if I needed somewhere to sleep. There was a 24-hour diner across the street, which I'd already clocked, where the owner was a woman named Miss Greta, who had let more than a few stranded travelers run up a tab. There was a church 2 streets over, that sometimes had people in it, late at night, and they wouldn't bother you if you knocked. And there was a trucker, she said. She lowered her voice slightly, who made the Memphis run twice a week, and usually stopped here for coffee around 10, and if I explained my situation, he might take me along. He was a known quantity. She'd seen him come through for years. She looked me dead in the eye when she said, "He's safe. I wouldn't send you if he wasn't." Her name, I found out because it was on the little placard on the counter, was Dottie. I wrote that down on the back of a receipt I found in my backpack pocket. I didn't want to forget it. When my phone got to 11%, I turned it on. I had 14 missed calls, 9 from my mother, 3 from a number I didn't recognize, 2 from Paige. I called my mother back first. She picked up on the first ring, and the sound of her voice, just her saying hello, just that one word, made my throat close up in a way it hadn't since I was maybe 8 years old and fell off my bike in front of our house. I held the phone for a second and breathed. "Mom," I said. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." She was not calm, but she was practical, which is better. Within 2 minutes she had confirmed she didn't have $200 to Venmo me until the morning when the bank opened. She'd had an unexpected car repair that week, and her account was nearly empty. She offered to call Paige. I told her not to. She offered to call my aunt in Atlanta, who might be able to help with money. I told her maybe. I told her I was okay. I told her I was charging my phone at the bus station and I had a lead on a ride, and she should just go to sleep and I would call her when I knew more. She didn't go to sleep. She told me later she sat in her kitchen the whole night. My phone was at 14% when I walked across the street to the diner. It was the kind of place that had been there since the 80s and hadn't changed much. Red vinyl booths, laminated menus, a pie case up front with 3 kinds of pie under glass, It was almost 10 o'clock, and there were maybe 6 people in the whole place. A waitress with a blonde braid was refilling coffee at a table near the window. Behind the counter, a heavyset black woman in a green apron was doing something to the coffee maker that required both hands and her full attention. I sat at the counter. The waitress with the braid came over. I told her what Dottie had told me. That I was stranded. That Miss Greta sometimes helped people in situations like mine. The waitress looked at me for a second. Then she looked toward the woman at the coffee maker and said, "Miss Greta, can you come here a minute?" Miss Greta turned around and looked me over, not unkindly, just directly, the way people look at you when they're deciding something. She asked me what happened. I told her. The whole thing, Paige, Cody, the trunk, the parking lot, the $11. I told it factually, without drama, because something about her face made me feel like drama would be the wrong choice. She nodded when I finished. Then she said, "You want coffee and something to eat?" I said yes. She said, "You got a phone?" I held it up. "Put your number in here." She handed me a notepad with a pen on top, "So I can reach you, and sit down. Don't go back across that street tonight." I sat in that diner for almost 2 hours. At some point, a man came in with a Braves cap and a gut, and the particular walk of someone who spends most of their life in a truck cab. He sat 3 stools down from me and ordered coffee and the meatloaf special. Miss Greta said something to him, nodded toward me. He looked at me. I looked at him. His name was Frank. He did the Nashville to Memphis run twice a week, and he was in fact heading to Memphis tonight. He left at 11:30. He had a passenger policy. 1 person at a time, no exceptions. But I was the only one here, so if I wanted a lift, I could take it. I asked him what he wanted in exchange. He shrugged. "Company. And you don't mess with the radio." I said deal. I ate the grilled cheese Miss Greta brought me without asking and drank 2 cups of coffee and sat in that warm, lit-up diner and took photographs of everything on my phone. The pie case, the laminated menu, the little placard over the register that said everyone who walks in here is somebody's somebody. I don't know why I needed to document it. It felt important not to forget. At 11:15, Frank left a tip on the counter and put on his cap. He said, "Ready?" We walked out into the cold together. In the truck, which was warmer than I expected, and smelled like pine air freshener and old coffee, Frank asked me exactly one personal question. "Your family always like that?" I thought about it for a minute. I thought about all the dinners where Paige had made a joke at my expense and everyone laughed. The Thanksgiving when I told them I was taking a job in Columbus, and my brother-in-law had said it out loud. Columbus. Why would anyone choose Columbus? And everyone had laughed except me. The way my mother always said, when I tried to bring it up, that Paige didn't mean anything by it, that I was too sensitive, that family was family. The way that phrase, family is family, had always worked like a door closing, like something that ended conversations instead of starting them. "I think so," I said. I just didn't want to see it. Frank nodded like that was a complete and sufficient answer. Then he turned on the radio, country too loud, and we drove south through the dark. I slept some. Not a lot, but some. Each time I woke up, I looked out the window at the highway lights and thought about what I was going to say when I got to my mother's house. Not to Paige. To my mother. Because that was the other thing I'd been turning over in that diner, and in the bus station before it, and in the parking lot when the shock first wore off and the anger came in. Paige had done something awful. That was clear. But Paige had also grown up in the same house I had, with the same family, and not once in 31 years had anyone looked at her and said, "This isn't okay." Not once. Every time she pushed too hard, someone smoothed it over. Every time she went too far, someone made it make sense. And I had been part of that system too. I had laughed at the jokes. I had absorbed the small cruelties. I had told myself it was just how she was, just how we were, and you didn't throw away family over stuff like that. Somewhere on the dark highway between Knoxville and Nashville, I decided I wasn't doing that anymore. We pulled into Memphis a little after 3 in the morning. Frank dropped me at the end of my mother's street because he couldn't get his rig down the cul-de-sac. I thanked him. He said, "You take care of yourself," and then he was gone. I walked down the quiet street in the dark with my backpack over one shoulder. The neighborhood was asleep. The streetlights were that warm orange color that always meant home to me when I was a kid. My mother's house was at the end, a brick ranch with a flower bed my dad had put in 20 years ago, and she'd kept going ever since, a porch light on even at 3 in the morning. She was waiting on the porch. She had her housecoat on, and her arms crossed against the cold, and she came down the steps when she saw me, and held on tight without saying anything for a long moment. She smelled like her lotion in the kitchen, like she always did. I held on too. When she finally let go, she looked at my face and then looked away. Come inside, she said. I have soup on the stove. We sat at her kitchen table at 3:30 in the morning, and I had soup and she had tea and we talked. Not about what to do, not yet, just about what had happened. I told her all of it from the beginning, and she listened without interrupting, which she was not always good at, but that night she managed it. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, I knew she was going to do something. I looked at her. Not this, she said quickly. Not. I didn't know it was going to be this. But I knew she had something planned. She'd been calling me all week saying you needed to be taken down a peg, that you were being arrogant about your job, about your choices. She set her mug down. I should have said something to you. I thought I was exaggerating. I thought Paige was just blowing off steam. There it was. The thing I'd been circling around all night on that highway. Not just Paige, the whole system. The way things move through our family. The warnings that never got passed on, the behavior that never got named, the floor that wasn't actually there. I didn't say any of that. Not at 3:30 in the morning with my mother looking at me like she was already bracing for it. I just said, I need you to hear me when I tell you things. Going forward, I need that to actually change. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. I know, she said. Paige and Cody arrived at noon the next day like nothing had happened. Paige walked in carrying a casserole dish and kissed my mother on the cheek, and then saw me standing in the kitchen doorway and stopped. For just a second, one beat, I saw something move across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like recalibration. She was figuring out what the room was doing. You made it, she said. I made it, I said. Cody was behind her. He looked at the floor. Paige set the casserole dish on the counter and started talking about the drive. How bad traffic had been. How they'd stopped at a place in Jackson for breakfast. My mother stood at the stove and said nothing. I stood in the doorway and said nothing. The kitchen was very quiet underneath Paige's talking. She stopped eventually. She looked at me again. I knew you'd be fine, she said. I knew it. You've always been the capable one. You left me at a bus station at 9 o'clock at night with a dead phone and $11, I said. It was a joke, Tessa. I know what it was. She blinked. I don't know why you're making this into something bigger than it is. You made it home. You're fine. You're standing right here. I'm standing right here, because a woman at the bus station charged my phone and a trucker drove me to Memphis at midnight. Not because you planned for me to be okay. You just hoped I would be. Cody still wasn't looking at anyone. My mother said very quietly from the stove, Paige, she's right. I don't know if Paige had ever heard that before. My mother saying, she's right. Not let's all calm down, not you know how she is. Just, she is right and you are wrong and I am telling you that clearly. Paige's face did something complicated. She started to say something, stopped, looked at Cody, looked at my mother, looked at me. I had taken photographs. Not for any plan I had at that point, just because it had felt important to document it. The bus station, the diner, Frank's truck cab, the highway in the dark from the passenger window, on my phone. Timestamps, location data, all of it. I didn't say that to Paige right then. I didn't need to. But I knew it was there. I need some air, Paige said, and she walked out the back door. Cody finally looked up. He looked at me and then looked at the floor again. I'm sorry, he said. It was very quiet. He might have been saying it to the floor, I know, I said. Thanksgiving that year was the strangest one we'd ever had. Paige came back in from the backyard after about 20 minutes and sat down and didn't say much. Cody helped with dishes. My mother and I made the green bean casserole together, like we always did, and we talked about small things, and I kept noticing how much lighter the kitchen felt, without the usual layer of performance over everything. Without everyone laughing too loud, and agreeing too fast and not looking at the real thing in the room. Paige and I didn't talk, not really, not the whole rest of the day. And that was fine. That evening, when everything was cleaned up and Paige and Cody were getting ready to leave, Paige found me in the living room where I was sitting on the couch scrolling through those photographs. The bus station, the pie case, the sign above Miss Greta's register. She sat down on the other end of the couch and looked at the phone in my hand. You took pictures the whole time? She said. Most of it, I said. She was quiet for a moment. That's actually kind of impressive. I didn't say anything. I didn't think you'd actually have a hard time, she said. I thought you'd just call an Uber and be annoyed with me. I didn't actually think. She stopped. Your phone was dead. My phone was dead, I said. I didn't know that. You didn't ask. She was quiet again for a long time. Outside, Cody was loading the car. I could hear him moving around on the porch. I don't know why I do that, Paige said finally. It was the quietest I'd ever heard her speak. The thing where I push until I don't know where the line is. You've always known where the line was, I said. You just trusted me not to hold it. She looked at me then, and I looked back. And for the first time in maybe my whole life, I felt like we were actually looking at each other. Not performing, not managing, not positioning, just seeing. I'm going to need some time, I said, before things are normal between us. I don't know how long, she said. Cody honked once, lightly, from outside. Paige stood up and got her coat and her purse. At the doorway to the living room, she turned back and said, I really didn't know your phone was dead. I know, I said. She left. I sat there alone in my mother's living room for a while, with those photographs on my phone, and the sounds of the house settling around me and the leftover smell of Thanksgiving dinner in the air. I thought about Dottie at the bus station. I thought about Miss Greta and the sign above her register. I thought about Frank, driving south in the dark, asking me only one question and then leaving the radio on low all the way to Memphis. All of those people had been strangers 8 hours before I met them. They'd never met me before and would probably never see me again. And they had, without being asked to, covered me, given me warmth and a phone charge and a hot meal and a safe ride home. I thought about what that meant. Not about Paige, I'd have time to think about Paige later, plenty of it, but about those strangers. About the fact that the help had come from outside, from people who owed me nothing, and that this was not an accident. This was what happened when the structure you'd been relying on turned out not to hold. You found out what the world actually was. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it was people like Dottie, people like Miss Greta, people like Frank in his truck, not asking too many questions, just driving. My mother came into the living room and sat in the armchair across from me. She had 2 cups of tea. She handed me one. You doing okay? She said. Yeah, I said, I think so. She nodded and looked out the front window. The street was quiet. Paige's car was gone. She's going to have to do some work, my mother said. I know, so am I, she said. I looked at her. I should have said something, she said, a long time ago. I kept thinking if I kept the peace it was better. But keeping the peace was just keeping things the same. And things weren't good, Tessa. They haven't been good for a long time, and I kept pretending they were, because I didn't know what else to do. She was looking at the window. Her hands were around the mug. I'm going to need things to be different, I said. I know, she said. So do I. We sat there in the quiet living room with our tea, and the house made its familiar sounds around us, and outside the November dark had come down fully over the neighborhood. I thought about how strange it was, how completely, disorienting strange, to arrive at a truth you'd been circling your whole life and find that it wasn't devastating. It was just true. Just something that now existed in the open where you could finally see it. I stayed in Memphis for 4 days. When I drove home, I rented a car. I wasn't riding back with Paige. I took the highway north through Tennessee the same way we'd come down, past Knoxville. I thought about stopping. I thought about driving past the Greyhound station, maybe past Miss Greta's diner, just to see it in the daylight. To see what those places looked like when they weren't the only lit windows in the dark. I didn't stop, but I thought about it the whole way through. A few weeks later, I sent Dottie a card at the bus station. I didn't have her last name, just the first name from the placard, so I addressed it to Dottie at the front counter, and hoped it got to her. I thanked her for the charger and the information, and for not asking too many questions. I told her she'd helped more than she probably knew. I sent Miss Greta a gift card to the restaurant supply store. I'd found the diner online. It had a Facebook page with exactly 12 posts and a 2-year-old photo of the pie case. I wrote in the note that her sign was true, that everyone who walked in was somebody's somebody, and that she had made me feel like mine. I don't know what happens next with Paige. That's the honest answer. We've texted a few times. Surface things, careful things. She sent me a link once to an article about family communication patterns, which was either a step forward or the most passive thing she'd ever done, and I genuinely couldn't tell. My mother calls me every Sunday now. That's new. We talk longer than we used to. Things aren't fixed. They might not get fixed, not fully. But they're named now, and named is different from hidden. Named means you can look at it. Named means you can decide what to do. The photographs are still on my phone. I've looked at them a lot. The bus station with its fluorescent lights. The diner across the street. The highway through Frank's windshield. Just lights in the dark and the road going forward. I don't know why I kept taking them that night. I think I knew, even then, that I needed evidence. Not for a lawsuit, not to show anyone, just for myself. Proof that I had been there, alone and cold and $11 short of a bus ticket home, and I had figured it out anyway. Not because I was capable, the way Paige said it, like it was a reason to be abandoned. But because people helped me, and I let them. That felt like something worth remembering.